Welcome back. U.S. intelligence officials on heightened alert over a major development that smacks like a new Cold War. Russian submarines and spy ships have been spotted operating near the underwater cables that carry almost all global internet communications and commerce, worth an estimated $10 trillion. U.S. naval commanders and intelligence officials warn that they have seen, and they are monitoring increasing activity from Russian vessels operating near these cables underwater in the North Sea, in ocean waters in Northeast Asia, and even in waters closer to American shores. U.S. intelligence officials worry that Russians might be planning to cut those underwater cables to devastate the U.S. and global economy. Joining me now, Christian Whiten. He's a former Bush State Department senior advisor. Christian, did anybody see this coming?
Well, the Soviets have had a long interest, the Russians, and before them the Soviets have had a long interest in communications and how you can blind your enemy, especially if you are, David, going up against Goliath, and the Russian military is a shadow of its former self. It's useful to throw sand in the eyes of your enemy and blind them. So this is something that's consistent with Russian activity, and also consistent with increased activity like putting bombers off of our coast, especially the Pacific coast, and also sending them toward the UK in patterns that really haven't been seen since the Cold War.
The reports indicate they've seen that Russian vessels have been spotted near Cuba. Here's the thing. How would we know that the Russians even did anything like this?
Well, that's the problem. We've been tracking the ships reportedly very closely using spy satellites, perhaps our own submarines. The government, of course, has been very vague as to what specifically has been done, but you can follow these ships, and not all of them are submarines. Some are surface ships that can be observed easily by satellites, moving along very suspicious trajectories, if you will, over the tops of these cables, and looking perhaps to sever them, or to be in a position to sever them at places where they'd be particularly difficult to
Christian,
repair.
Say one of the cables was cut by the Russians. How would we know that they did it, and how would we know that, it occurred?
Well, it would probably be cut in the early stages of a conflict as part of a bigger war, so it would be very suspicious. There's a question of whether it could be done if we were, say, in war with another adversary that Russia was becoming more friendly with, like China. Presumably a cable being cut, because these carry an enormous amount of traffic. They're not very numerous, so we would notice an immediate, basically, disconnect. Now, there are still other ways we connect with Europe, and that is the threat that these would be cut communications, not just things like ordering off of Amazon or ordering off of British e-commerce sites, but you think of the internet and it being involved in so much of what we're doing.
Christian,
so it would be a big impact.
Right. Maybe there's another storyline out here as well. Maybe could it be that the Russians are putting a straw in that cable to spy?
That's also possible, and that was done with great success by us during the Cold War. We could, in fact, lay something underneath a cable that could bring the communications in, record them, be picked up by a submarine. The Soviets could pick up that cable and inspect it and not even see that we had been listening to that. It's a little different with the technology that is there today. It's probably more of an effort to be in a position to sabotage this early in a conflict. Incidentally, also our other means of communication, satellites, are probably very vulnerable as well.
All right, Mr. Christian Whiten, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you out there, viewers, for joining us as well. Please join Charles every night at 6 p.m. If you can't, make sure to set your DVR. You don't want to miss a moment of making money. Right now, Lou Dobbs.